We've got Colonel John Antal here. He's a West Point graduate, served 30 years in the military, in airborne rangers, tanks, and cavalry. Retired, was hired by Microsoft. Today he works with an Indian video company. It's also with History Channel, doing what he's doing today. He's on 660 AM radio on the Jane David Wells Show as a host. He's written 13 books, and I think you'll find it very entertaining today and very learn a lot of principles that we have to apply if we're going to take this country back. Would you please come up, John? Give him a big hand.
Thank you, Ashton. First, let's get moving this. Hooah! In the U.S. Army, we have a saying. It's called hooah. When you say hooah, it means anything but no. We're going to take that hill. Hooah! We're going to take that hill. Hooah? But it's hooah. So I want everyone here to give me a hooah on three. H-O-O-A-H. Hooah! Okay? On three now. 1, 2, 3. Hooah! That was great. Wow. Very nice to be here. Thank you very much. Ashton, thank you for that kind introduction. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is for my wife and I to be here. And I want to introduce you to my wife, the love of my life. 26 years, U.S. Army wife who has taken care of soldiers all around the world. Antal, her nickname is Angel. If you get a chance, go talk with her. She has stories that you won't believe. Everywhere I went, I was known as Angel's husband, because she could win their hearts, and, I was just that soldier guy. But 30 years United States Army, West Point, all I ever wanted to do was be a soldier. When I graduated from West Point, we were in the Cold War. My first assignment was with the 3rd Armored Division. We used to have a lot of them. We had 18 divisions in the U.S. Army then. We have about 8 now, 10 if you count the real flags, but only about 8 in numbers. So I was on the East German border with tanks as a young officer, young man. Served 30 years, had a great opportunity to do some good things. I commanded a tank battalion on the demilitarized zone in Korea. I was able to command a cavalry regiment, and I'm wearing this hat because at the end of this, you must ask me why I'm wearing this hat. I can explain that to you. So it's a question you have to ask. And had a chance to do a couple of other things. I was special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So everywhere that General Shelton went when President Clinton was president, I was with him and we were doing all that stuff. So it was a really interesting time to learn about many things. And retired in 2003. And my wife and I now live in Allen, Texas. So we came up last night. And I want to teach you a story about leadership just from the beginning. All leaders need to be able to adapt, improvise, and overcome. And my wife is a great leader because when I left the house yesterday, I packed the car and as a good, dutiful husband, thinking about my presentation today with my mind fixed, we got into the car and we drove to Tyler. Last night, we got into our bedroom area. We had a little cottage out here by the lake we were able to get, and pulled out all the gear, and she said, "Where's my suitcase?" And I said, "Ma'am, no excuse. I think I left it at home." But she did not panic. She adapted. She improvised. She overcome. We went out shopping, and we got everything she needed. so she's a good leader, and I failed at that station. But I've learned, and that is one of the important things about leadership. Now, what I want to talk to you today about is freedom and people who are unreasonable for the cause of liberty. Freedom and people who are unreasonable for the cause of liberty and why we need them. I'm going to tell you some stories you probably haven't heard before, so I hope that you'll enjoy them. But first, what is freedom? We talk about it a lot, but we don't define it well. And if you can't define something, then you can't be sharp in your thinking and you can't measure it. Now, people talk about freedom all over the world, and they think they have it. People in France think they have freedom. In fact, people in China, can you believe people in China believe they have freedom? Now, we don't believe that because we have a very special kind of freedom. This is a very, very sacred plant that only grows in such soil as ours. You can't transplant it everywhere, even if you try. Here are some things that I think are important about our freedom. 3 major subcomponents of the definition of freedom. 1, national freedom. National freedom is when no one else is ruling you. So when we were 13 colonies, we were part of the British Empire. Once we declared our independence, we then wanted the British to be gone. And they've been gone since since we won the Revolutionary War. So our question then is, do we have national freedom? Yes, we have national freedom. The second kind of freedom is political freedom. The ability to be able to elect people who are supposed to represent you in some kind of deliberative body. Many nations around the world have political freedom, but many do not. The democracies of Europe have political freedom. In China, there is no political freedom. But the Chinese are free because they have national freedom. You see, it depends on your perspective. So political freedom we have, and it's an amazing thing. Now, it can get better. We have a lot of problems with our current situation, and I think that many of you would say that we are inevitably moving from republic to empire, much like the Roman legions, much like the Roman Republic failed and then turned into a Roman Empire. And you can see this kind of thing happening when you have a president who decides he's going to bypass Congress, bypass the Senate who's supposed to make treaties, and go straight to the United Nations. To me, that is an assault against the Republic, an assault against liberty. But the third sub-aspect of freedom is individual freedom. The ability to do as you want with your life as long as you don't hurt someone else. Very few people on earth have ever experienced that individual freedom. In fact, Americans are blessed with a balance of those 3, of national freedom, of political freedom, and of individual freedom. Canada has all 3, but they have less individual freedom than we do. Europe has all 3, but they have less individual freedom than we do. Russia has only national freedom. So when you think about freedom, you have to think about those 3 aspects. And when you talk to other people about freedom, if you're to go to an Iraqi and say, we want you to be free, that means something totally different than if you talk to a Texan. By God, if you're a Texan, you know all 3. And I am a son of Texas. I proudly got here in 1985 as fast as I could, and I have been a Texan ever since, and I tell you, we are blessed to be in a place right now that still has those 3 in the best balance. We could do better, and we need to do better. And people like Senator Ted Cruz and others, they know what we need to make it better, and I totally concur with the previous speakers that we need to keep working at it. But you know, one of the things we need to do to understand who we are is not only define freedom, but to understand where we came from. Why are we the way we are? And why did this come about? And how did unreasonable people who are unreasonable for the cause of liberty, make all the difference? So, let me tell you a story. I think you're going to like this story. How many of you know that the Declaration of Independence was created, leveraged, almost made to be about because of a biker gang and a Starbucks owner? You don't believe me, it's true. Now, a biker gang. On the 19th of April, 1775, the British decided they'd had enough with the Bostonians, and they were going to go out to Concord and Lexington. They were going to take our guns, and they were going to tell us who was boss. General Gage, the commander of the rebellious Massachusetts colony and the guy who was in charge of putting down this uprising of these upstart rabble who decided that they weren't going to obey orders, he sent out his regiment of soldiers to Concord and Lexington, and most of you know what happened. The shot heard round the world happened at Concord, And then later on at Lexington, the British showed up, and at each place they burned whatever stores they could find. And from the surrounding hills and the surrounding area, the Minutemen saw Concord burning and Lexington burning. And they knew that at Concord we'd lost patriots who had stood their ground against the British. So when the British returned from Lexington to go back to Boston town, 17 miles, they met militia after militia after militia who fired at them and shot at them from stone walls and then melted away, and they could not engage them in battle, and the British lost about 75 soldiers on that disastrous retreat from Lexington. And the next day, 20,000 militia, swarming militia in the next days and the next weeks, surrounded Boston. And the British were in Boston, and we were at war. Now, we were still British. We were not Americans yet. We were British rebels because we were not going to let them dictate how we lived. So the British Army is now in Boston, and they're holed up in Boston. And all of these rebels are surrounding them and sieging Boston. And on June 14th, 1775, the Second Continental Congress declared George Washington the commander of the Continental Army, newly formed Continental Army. This is the birth of the United States Army, and that's the reason it's Flag Day. The 14th of June. Washington immediately took off toward Cambridge to try to meet the militia leaders to see how he could organize an army out of this and see what he could do. Needless to say, Washington's job was unbelievable. If you think it is hard to run a group like this, I can assure you that if you were trying to run an army, to lead an army, in 1775, in the summer of 1775, where militia were coming from all over the 13 colonies, because they were all angry at Britain and the boot heel on their neck of the English and the British king, if in fact you were trying to lead that, you would pull your hair out if you had it. And I assure you, that's one reason, and I assure you that Washington did his best, but these guys didn't even know anything about being soldiers, and they didn't know anything about hygiene, and so there's a lot of things you have to teach soldiers when there's thousands of them all camped together. Needless to say, Washington's trying to solve this problem. How do we fight this war? How do we get the British out of America? So he has sieged Boston, but he has a deficit. He has soldiers that have mostly rifles, not muskets, and muskets have bayonets on them. Rifles do not in this age. Rifles are for hunting. Muskets are for soldiers. So he doesn't have many muskets, and he doesn't have many cannon. But he's got militia with rifles, he's got some muskets, he's got some militia that have trained better than others, and some that are not. Well, while all this is going on, we go back to our biker gang. Out in the wilds of what is now Vermont, there was a biker gang. They were called the Green Mountain Boys. Now, the Green Mountain Boys didn't really have bikes. But if they were living today, they would be a biker gang. Because they got together and they basically liked to raise Cain. Well, they had a leader named Ethan Allen. Some of you may own some furniture like that. But Ethan Allen was a patriot. And he said, by God, we're going to go after these guys. So he said, I know what. I'm going to get about 400 of my best friends together. We're going to have a little drink and have some fun, smoke a little tobacco, and then we're going to head north. And we're going to go to Fort Ticonderoga. Fort Ticonderoga is the Death Star of North America. This Fort Ticonderoga has more cannon than any other place in America, in the 13 colonies. And in fact, do you know how many arms factories we had in 13 colonies? How many places made muskets in the 13 colonies at this time, 1775? 0. How many made cannon? 0. Why? Kings don't want you to have the ability to have rifles and muskets and cannons so that you can say no to them. So, the stuff we had all got was purchased at our own cost. The rifles that most of the militia had, the Minutemen, were all at their own cost. So here we are, Washington's got this army. This biker gang goes up to Ticonderoga. Now, Fort Ticonderoga as the Death Star, the most impressive, impregnable fort, a star-shaped fort with 20-foot walls, with more cannon than you can imagine, and a strong British garrison. And he takes 400 of his biker gang, and he goes up there. He meets a guy named Benedict Arnold at the time. Arnold at that time wasn't a traitor. And he says to Arnold, "Get out of my way, I'm going to do this." And Arnold says, "No, I'm in charge." And then Ethan Allen says, "Right you are, these are my men." And he goes up in the middle of the night and takes Fort Ticonderoga without losing a man, and captures the entire garrison. And the British commander says, "By whose right do you have to take over this fort?" Because he didn't even know the war had started. And Ethan Allen says, "By the Continental Congress and the great Jehovah." So this British commander thought he was insane. And to follow up, Ethan Allen and his biker gang decide then to get into the British liquor stores, and for 4 days they have a party while they tie up the British guys. So you can imagine what this went like. So the story, though, goes out far and wide that we, in fact, have conquered Fort Ticonderoga, the Death Star of North America, a fort that was built by the French that no one thought anyone could ever take, particularly without cannon and a siege and an army. So this biker gang has now taken Fort Ticonderoga, but it's 350 miles away from Boston. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. It was out there to guard the frontier against the Indians and the French. And actually the French built it to guard against the British. And so here's this fort and this victory, but no big deal. So Washington is trying to put this army together, and he's trying to keep everything going, and he's not really fighting many battles against the British. And the British fought a battle at Bunker Hill before Washington came and lost so many men, they said, "We're not going to attack those guys again until we get reinforcements." So they send for reinforcements, and the British are waiting for reinforcements, and the months go by. September goes by. October goes by. November goes by. It's November 1775. We are still sieging Boston, and British ships are beginning to come in and bring reinforcements to Boston. And Washington knows he doesn't have much time before they get enough forces that they're going to do something. So that's where the Starbucks owner comes in. This young man, when he was 12, his father died, and his mother was not well off. So she said to this young man, she said, "Son, get a job. And by the way, I've worked it out so you can be apprenticed to a bookstore." So Henry, first name, Henry gets a job working in a bookstore. And he's making books. He's doing the printing press. He's setting type. And Henry has a heart and he has a brain. And he starts to read at 12 years old. And he reads every book in the bookstore. And by 20 years old, he says, "You know what? I could do this." And he becomes an entrepreneur, and he sets up his own bookstore. And Henry's bookstore is one of the finest bookstores in Boston. He gets all the latest books. All the pretty girls from Boston come down there to wear their best dresses. All the young men come into his bookstore to look like they're reading books so they can look at the ladies. And Henry sells coffee and tea. Henry has a Starbucks. Now, it wasn't called a Starbucks, but it's the same thing. And Henry read a lot about the military, and he loved to read about artillery, because artillery is the king of battle, particularly in those days. In combat in those days, muskets could fire with well-trained British soldiers, three rounds a minute, 3 rounds a minute. And that is a tremendous fast rate of fire in the fog and confusion of battle when you have to load each round separately, ram it down, cock the flint, and make sure you put powder in the pan before you shoot. This is a tremendous amount to do 3. If you've ever tried this, it would take you 5 minutes to do it once. And if you're not trained, it takes forever. And if you have a rifle, you can only fire 1 round a minute, because the rifle has a smaller groove in it. It has a smaller barrel, and it's harder to ram that down. So good British soldiers could fire 3 rounds a minute. Most of the Continentals could fire 1 or 2 rounds a minute. But cannon made all the difference, because when it boomed, you normally got someone's attention. And you could fire both ball and you could fire canister, which is called often grape shot. Grape shot is basically a naval round, but canister was nails and glass and bolt BBs that could all fire out like a big shotgun. So Henry is learning about cannon. And we used to practice with his militia in Boston, on the common there, and he would, to the delight of all the people, right outside his Starbucks, he would fire his big 2-pounder cannon. Now, a 2-pounder cannon is kind of like a shotgun on wheels. So pop, there would go. And he learned all about it from this little thing and reading books. So in November, he comes up to General George Washington, and he says, "Sir, in a group like this, full of colonels, imagine you're all colonels and generals from all over, South Carolina, from Pennsylvania, from New Jersey, from New York, believe it or not. Even a few New Yorkers were there. So imagine that, and here you have all these colonels and generals, and Henry is 25 years old. And he has never done anything but fight in the Battle of Bunker Hill as a captain and read books. And he comes up to General George Washington and he says, "Your Excellency, sir, I have a solution to your problem." And everyone laughed. Now, I also have to mention something about Henry. He was a big guy. He was 6'4". He was one of the only men that General Washington looked up to, because Washington was 6'3". He also weighed about 285 pounds on a good day. So he was not your action figure. He was plump. So here he is, and he goes up in front of General George Washington, in front of everyone, and says, "I have a solution to your problem," and they laughed. All the colonels and generals laughed, and Washington said, stand by. Don't do that. "Sir," and Washington was a smart guy. He had checked Henry out. He had talked to Henry over the weeks, and he says, "Tell me what your plan is." Henry says, "I propose that I leave here, go to Fort Ticonderoga, fetch those cannon for you, bring them down, we'll put them on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the British fleet, and when we do that, they'll have one choice, leave or fight, and we'll sink them all, because land guns win over ship guns 9 times out of 10. And Washington said, "That's brilliant." And everyone else just went, right. This guy, 25-year-old, he's a bookstore owner. What does he know? But you see, Henry was unreasonable for the cause of liberty. He knew that if we didn't get those guns, this wouldn't end. So Henry took his force and left on the orders of George Washington to go to Fort Ticonderoga. Do you know how many was in his force? Any guesses? 1. He left with his 14-year-old brother. Both of them on horseback in the middle of the night with a letter from George Washington. And Washington said, "And by the way, the Continental Congress has authorized this script. Everybody loves it. See if you can get someone to take it. It's money, but it ain't pounds, and it ain't gold. It's paper. And nobody knows what it is because the Continental Congress just started." So here we are. Henry running off into the night with his 14-year-old brother, goes to Fort Ticonderoga. He gets there. Being unreasonable for the cause of liberty, he knows how to get people to work together. He asked the people of New York in that department to help him. He got people to help assist. He was able to get people to join his effort. The worst winter that you could imagine occurred in December and January of 1775. There are no roads between Cambridge, Massachusetts, Boston, and the fort. Absolutely no roads. And no one river that you could get down because most of them are frozen. So Henry organizes this, and since he's read books, he has no practical engineering background. He takes all of these, he puts them on sleds, he starts hauling them by horse and oxen and by man. He comes to a big hill, they can't go around it, they can't get down it, lowers the cannon on ropes, takes them apart piece by piece, lowers them on ropes, gets down to the bottom, walks across, climbs the hill, lowers them up the hill, goes to the next thing. Obstacle after obstacle is overcome. He comes to a river. He's trying to cross with these heavy sleds, with these heavy cannon. The snow is coming down sideways. It is difficult. Most reasonable people would say, let's rest, let's just take our time, let's not do anything. It's going to be night soon. Henry says, okay, you guys stop, I'm going to check the river out. He goes out, he sees that it's too thin. The ice is too thin to cross. But he's read books. He has a brain. He is self-taught. He is 25. He takes an auger and burrows into the ice. The water comes up. It's cold at night, colder at night. It freezes. 2 more inches of ice, crosses the river. Nothing stops him. He gets to Cambridge, Massachusetts with 16-ton of cannon, 63 guns. In March of 1776. All the colonels are in the big house. He comes to General Washington and says, General Washington, sir, the noble train of artillery has arrived. I have your cannon. Washington says, good, but you're not done. Get them up on Dorchester Heights. In a week, they are up on Dorchester Heights. The ground is frozen. How do you get cannon up on the frozen ground with some kind of battlement so they don't get blown away? For a week, the soldiers of the Continental Army weaved baskets, big wicker baskets, like a big trash can. One night, they put them up on top of the hill and they fill them with dirt. You can't dig down, so you build up. And he built a battlement across Dorchester Heights, which is almost a straight wall looking into the bay at Boston. The next morning, there are 2 interesting characters involved here. The British commanders, Admiral Howe, he commands, the British naval commanders, Admiral Howe, he commands the British fleet. Each British man of war has more cannon than anywhere else in the United States, in the continental 13 colonies, except right now on Dorchester Heights. Each one of these man of war is like a battleship for its day. And each one of them is so expensive. It's like an aircraft carrier. If you sink one, it is a great dishonor to England. Admiral Howe looks out and he goes, bloody hell, where did those cannon come from? He goes into the town and talks to his brother, General Howe, who's in charge of the army. Howe and Howe, interesting brothers. So General Howe says, bloody hell, where'd those cannon come from? Admiral Howe says to General Howe, Howe, old boy, the fleet has to leave. You have a choice. Attack tonight and destroy those guns, or I'm out of here. You can come with me or you can stay, because I'm not about to risk the fleet. General Howe says, I'll attack tonight with everything I have. General Howe gets his army together for a night attack. He says, no one will load ammo, we will just use the bayonet. The bayonet has been very effective because the British have muskets with bayonets. The American Continentals don't have as many. But the snow starts to come down. Bad. Rain, hail, snow, coming down straight. It's coming down sideways. It's coming right into their faces. And he says, this weather's much too bad. Call it off. So he comes back the next morning, and Admiral Howe's there going, you got a choice. What do you want to do? He says, I got another plan. He raises the white flag. He goes to the edge of Boston. They see it. Washington and Howe meet, and Howe says, I won't burn your stinking Boston town if you let us get on the ships and go without shooting at us. Washington thinks about it for a microsecond and says, go, be gone. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day, the British load. They burn a lot of stuff in Boston. They destroy a lot of stuff, including a bookstore that they know. Henry's bookstore. And they get on their ships and they go to Nova Scotia. In March of 1776, there are no British soldiers in the 13 colonies. In March of 1776, unreasonable men who are leaders unreasonable for liberty have forced the enemy to withdraw. In July, we're euphoric. We create a Declaration of Independence because they are gone. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and this is the political and the individual freedom that no one else in the world has. And the king is livid. He is absolutely incensed. But because of a biker gang and because of a Starbucks owner, we were able to start a great experiment called American Liberty. We were able to create a wonderful declaration and the beginning of a chance for a nation. Amazing how leadership makes a difference. Amazing how you all can make a difference in your leadership. Every person who saw Henry when he went in to talk to Washington thought it was impossible. Many times along the route, he was told it was impossible. But it's only impossible if you quit. If you quit, it's over. But leaders who continue, who fight on, who never quit, generate options. You can generate those options and you can then seek and seize opportunities. Leadership needs that. Now, I have one more story if we have time. Do we have time? Let me tell you this story, because what happened was King George was so angry that he decided to send the largest invasion force the British ever mustered until D-Day 1944. And he sent it against us to crush our liberty, to tell us that we were going to be subjects and we would like it. And he sent with him, with this force, some of the fiercest soldiers in Europe, the Hessians. The Hessians were German soldiers who fought for pay, and the King of England didn't have enough ground forces, so he couldn't get a big coalition together, so he started paying for other soldiers to fight. And so he hired Hessian regiments to assist him and fight with his force. They came back in September of 1776. Our country is 3 months old. I mean, we just declared independence on the 4th of July. In September, they come back. Washington meets them, and Washington does his best, but this army has not yet been trained. They had a siege. They had cannon. The British left. There was not much of a fight for Boston, so they haven't fought many battles. And they haven't fought under Washington, and they haven't fought with regiments and brigades and with leaders who know how to move and bring forces to bear in the right place at the right time. So no matter how hard Washington tried, he lost battle after battle after battle. He's forced out of New York. And for the rest of the war, New York remains under British control. New York City in particular, most of New York City and much of the Long Island in that area remains under British control. Washington is forced into New Jersey. He's beaten again. He fights at Fort Washington and Fort Lee, and they lose. Now the British are driving them through New Jersey, and the 20,000 that once existed, the Sunshine Patriots who were there when the Declaration of Independence was signed in the summer, are now finding themselves winter soldiers, and few of them remain. In fact, these are the times that try men's souls. This is what Thomas Paine wrote. Because that 20,000 was reduced to about 6,000. And they were under 3 different commanders at that time. Washington was the overall commander, but he dispersed his forces. He's leaving New Jersey, trying to get to the safety of Pennsylvania so he can put the Delaware River between himself and the British. One force is under a general named Lee, Charles Lee. The other force is under a commander named Horatio Gates. And the third is Washington's. Washington has about 2,500 men. Gates has about 1,000, and Lee has about 1,200. And as they're dispersing through New Jersey, trying to flee from the British who are hot on their heels, and the Hessians in particular, Washington comes to the Delaware River, and his force is there. He doesn't know where the rest are. And what he doesn't know is that Charles Lee, who is taking his force out, decided one night. Charles Lee was an interesting fellow. He hated Washington, and he wanted Washington's job. He thought Washington was no leader, and he thought Washington was incompetent. Charles Lee decided he wouldn't sleep with his troops that night. He would go to a tavern, have some female companionship, a nice glass of port, and a good hot meal and a soft bed. Unfortunately, when he did that, a guy named Bannister Tarleton, British Dragoon commander, cavalry basically, captured him in that tavern. And for the British, this was like capturing Osama bin Laden. And if any of you ever watched the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, the bad guy in that movie, who wore the green jacket with, the red jacket with the green piping, that guy is supposed to be Bannister Tarleton. So he captured General Lee. So Lee's now a prisoner, and Lee is talking and telling everything that he knows about the Continental Army. Now his force, under General Sullivan, because he's second in command, Sullivan takes command and evades the British and tries to get across. But Washington comes to the river. He doesn't know Lee is captured. He doesn't know where Gates is, hasn't heard a word, because these guys aren't even talking to him, which is another problem. He comes to the river, and he comes to his this, and there's no boats. And he says, okay, Colonel Glover. Colonel Glover was a Marblehead fisherman, a man who was an amazing fellow. He was a Presbyterian who decided he would not wear a uniform. He would only wear civilian clothes. His men were fishermen. They would not fight with muskets. They would fight with pikes. That's like sharp, pointy sticks. Think about that. And they were great with boats. So he had got a whole regiment of his own guys. And they were Washington's naval crossing force. And they had been utilized once before to get Washington out of New York into New Jersey. And they had done great work. So Washington goes to Glover and he says, Colonel Glover, get my army across the Delaware. And Glover says, yes, sir, with what boats? And Washington says, Glover, get my army across the river. And Glover says, sir, I repeat, with what boats? Glover, up the river from here is a coal works, and they have many boats. I know this because I have spies out and I pay for them. Go get those boats and bring them here, and any other boat you can find. And Glover says, yes, sir. Glover goes out to the Durham coal works and finds these boats. He gives the owner of the Durham coal works the opportunity to either sell the boats or will take them. And so he gives them very fine, brandly new minted U.S. Congress script that says, we owe you, and gives them this. And he takes the boats and he brings them down and he brings Washington's army across the Delaware River. But Washington's army is about now 2,000 soldiers. Some as young as 14. What were you doing when you were 14? Carrying a musket in the cause of liberty. Some as old as 60 and 70. Most of us know what we're doing. But imagine. And they don't have any shoes. This isn't metaphor. This is true. Why don't they have shoes? How many of you have walked so much that you wore out your shoes? As an airborne ranger, I can tell you, we carried an extra pair of boots in our rucksack because when you ran out, when your boots finally collapsed, fell apart, and these are these new, highly crafted, rubber-soled, beauty boots. When these things fall out, you need another pair because you can't walk without them. Well, these guys had leather shoes when they started the war, and they marched every day, and they marched all the time, sometimes 15, 20 miles a day. So by this time, they're running out of leather. There's nothing left. So they're wrapping their feet in burlap. They're trying to figure out how to get shoes. River crossing occurs. Washington's getting his people across. Alexander Hamilton, take out your $10 bill someday. Hamilton was more than you think. He was one hell of a soldier. Hamilton worked for Henry Knox. Henry Knox, by the way, the guy who got those cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, became the chief of artillery for Washington. Hamilton is in charge of the cannon that is firing at the British as the British are charging forward, trying to stop the Americans from escaping across the Delaware River. He's one of the last guys across. His cannon defeat the initial enemy charge and stop them and delay them long enough so we can finally make the crossing with fewer casualties. Hamilton was one hell of a fighter. So then, Washington is now on the Pennsylvania side, and he says, Colonel Glover, I don't want a single boat to fall into British hands. You make sure that doesn't happen. He says, sir, there is no problem. I have every boat for 60 miles. There are no boats to be had. The British commander, who is now under General Howe, has given a sub-commander named Cornwallis. General Cornwallis comes up, and with him is a Hessian commander named Joachim Rall. And Johann Rall was the commander of a Hessian regiment that was known for bayoneting prisoners once they captured them in New York and New Jersey. So American patriots were pinned to trees by Hessian bayonets, and the Hessians would laugh at them as they died. So now, Rall and Cornwallis are at the edge of the Delaware looking out, and they see the rebels on the other side, and they don't look like much, and the snow is coming. And Cornwallis says, we'll get them in the spring. We'll get them in the spring. I want you to quarter your regiment in that town over there, and you get ready for them. So Washington pulls into the camp, and his men start licking their wounds. They haven't had a rest in a long time because they've been rushing away from the British for fear of their lives. Now they have a short time to rest and eat some food. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of supplies coming. There's not a lot of ammunition. There's hardly any food. They scour the countryside, get what they can, but there aren't a lot of people who think this revolution is going to last. The people in New Jersey are now ambivalent. The people in New York have turned almost all to the British. The British are offering anyone who wants to become a British citizen again free passage. All you have to do is say you're with us. And by the way, turn in a rebel, and that'd be really nice. These are the times that try men's souls. Continental Congress is in Philadelphia, and Washington has to make some decisions. He's got less than 2,000 effective soldiers. He's got 2,000 on the books, but out of that, most of them are sick. Many of them have bloody feet. Ammunition is low, food is bad. Leaders are beginning to wonder why they're there. He hasn't heard from Lee. He hasn't heard from Gates. So on the 23rd of December, he has a council of war. This is where he would bring his officers in and talk with them about what he wants to do. And when that happened, General Gates appeared. General Gates appeared with 800 men. And Washington said, General Gates, it is good to see you. Sit down at this table. We were just going to talk about what we're going to do here. And Gates says, oh, really? You're going to tell me what you're going to do? I was just chased all the way here. We barely made it. My men are exhausted. You're going to tell me about something? What are you going to tell me, General? He says, well, if you give me an opportunity, I'll explain. Oh, please, go ahead. Well, General Washington says, he stands up in front of and he's got all his colonels around him, and General Gates standing right over there. General Gates won't sit down. He's mad. He's hot. He doesn't like Washington. He's been sending letters to the Continental Congress why he should be the commander of the army. And by the way, he had served in the British Army, so he knew a lot about military affairs, according to General Gates. He was his best publicist. And Congress thought so too, because they were getting a lot of letters from him. Of course, Washington was sending letters, but Washington was always kind about his generals, and he never said much about them unless there was a real problem. But they're getting all this bad press about Washington from Gates, and Gates goes up there and says, go ahead, tell me your plan. And Washington says, here's what I think we need to do. I propose that on Christmas Day, we get everyone together, and we cross the Delaware River at night, at Christmas night. And the next morning, we attack the Hessians in Trenton. And I have reconned this position. I've gone almost right up to the town. I think we can do it. I think we can take it. Now, Colonel Rall is in charge there. And every morning at Stantu, every morning at the sunrise, his men are up in formation with muskets ready. So if we can attack them before they can get their formations, before they get up, and after Christmas, maybe we'll be able to get them. Maybe they'll be partying. Maybe we can get them. What do you think of my plan? General Gates says, you don't want to know. Washington says, please, sir, tell me. Gates says, well, first, sir, to have an army, you have to have soldiers. Your men aren't soldiers. They're lads of 14. They're old men of 65. They don't even have boots. You don't have an army. How can you attack? Should I go on? Oh, Washington says, please, sir, continue. Second, for an army to win, it has to go in one direction. Your army always goes in the other direction. You want more? Third, you want to attack Hessians. These are European soldiers, the finest soldiers on earth, and you bloody well know it, and you're seeking annihilation. You can't lead, so you just want to kill yourself. And Washington says, is that all, sir? He says, no. Last thing, you are no leader. You don't know how to lead an army. You've bungled everything up to this point, and you should be relieved. Have you had a bad day? You ever had a bad day? Yeah. Imagine if you're George Washington. Now, he just got a letter from Congress. He didn't tell Gates this yet, but he got this letter from Congress, because this is another piece of good news. The letter says, "Dear George, we think the British are marching on Philadelphia. We're out of here. You're in charge." Washington has 2,000 soldiers. Now he has 800 more, but out of those, most of them are sick, some are wounded, all have been worn out. Gates, in front of all his colonels, has just told them all the reasons why he should be reasonable. Thank God, Washington was an unreasonable man. He looks to Gates and says, "That's not what we're going to do. Alexander Hamilton, put your gun on him. He leaves tonight. He doesn't talk to his men. He leaves this camp. If he turns around, shoot him." Gates says, "You wouldn't dare." Washington says, "Try me, sir. Only try me." Gates leaves in search of Congress. Washington then sits down with his men, and his colonels chuckle a little bit, but they say, "There's nothing funny about this. What Gates says is right. We're attempting the impossible. And our password for this attack is going to be victory or death. And here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to have one force attack to the south, across the river to the south. We're going to go in the center, and one force is going to attack in the north. The force in the south is going to be about 600 men, mostly militia, and it's going to be a blocking force to stop the British from retreating. The force in the north is going to do the same thing with more Continentals. They'll be in the north, and they'll block them from trying to get from the north. We will cross at McConkey's Ferry on Christmas Day, Christmas night, as soon as it gets dark, because we don't want the British to see us. We'll get across the river before midnight. We'll march on Trenton. We'll hit them before daylight, and we'll take everything we need, boots, guns, ammos, and we'll capture all." Men said, "Roger that." Glover's in charge of getting the boats across. Henry Knox is in charge of the river crossing, the 25-year-old who owned a bookstore. Washington knows how to pick people, but it doesn't matter how old you are or young you are. It matters about your merit. And Washington was a great judge of character. He knew how to get people to do stuff. So Glover gets all the boats together. The men are in the freezing rain. And it starts to rain, and then it starts to hail, and it starts to sleet, and then it starts to snow. It starts to snow straight, and then it starts to snow sideways, and now it's coming straight in your face. The snow is so bad you cannot see 5 feet in front of you. Now, all of you have seen that picture of Washington crossing the Delaware. Don't forget, that was painted by a German in 1857. In Germany, okay? That was kind of idealistic. The way it really looked was, imagine a white piece of paper in front of your face. That's what it looked like. The crossing begins, and of course, how many of you have done a night river crossing? Okay, I have. But let me tell you what, nothing goes according to plan. Plans are basis for changes, and everything, when you're in the friction of war, slows down. So Washington now is looking at his watch, his pocket watch. He doesn't have a wristwatch, pocket watch. And he is the first to cross with some of his Virginians, and he seizes the far side of the river. They secure it, and everybody starts crossing. And he's there, and he goes over and sits down on a crate and waits. He doesn't jump around telling everybody what to do. All his officers know what to do. Right now, all he can do is trust them to get the job done. He's watching everything, and he's ready to make decisions if he has to, but he doesn't have to make the decisions because all his people are doing what they've been told to do. Glover is getting the men across, and they are rowing one way, emptying a boat, coming back, and rowing again. And the Delaware River is nothing to be trifled with. If any of you have ever seen the Delaware River in swell stage, you know this is a deadly river. It is also frozen, full of ice, and now we have snow coming down sideways, and you can't see anything. You can't see 5 feet in front of you. So Glover's men are having a hard time making it to the far side. So Henry Knox gets on the far side, and with his booming voice, this 6'4", 285-pound colonel now, 25-year-old colonel is up there going, "Over here, over here." And they all start coming in to his booming voice. All night he's doing this. Unfortunately, they're not across at midnight. They're not across at 1. They're not across at 2. By the way, to get the cannon across, you have to take these Durham boats, you have to put a platform on them, you have to roll the cannon on them, nail that platform down, roll the cannon on it, and then swim it across. You have to wait for the cannon last. The cannon have to be last. And if you have horses, you have to put them on this too, because horses don't like to be on rickety boats. This was tough, because you can't move the cannon just by people. You had to have a couple of horses. So Henry Knox finally gets his cannon across, but it's 3 in the morning. Now, you're Washington. The Congress has left. Gates is out there trying to get you replaced. You've got about 2,400 men. You're late. Rahl, every morning, the Hessian, has had his men up because he is a strict disciplinarian. He is a Hessian. At sunrise, those guys are in formation ready to fight every morning. It's 3 in the morning. It takes you 3 hours to get to Trenton from where they are. You'll not make it before daylight. General Sullivan comes up to you. He was the one who took over from General Lee, who was captured. And he said, "Sir, I just got word about the attacks to the south, and I got word about the attacks to the north. They couldn't make it across the river. It's just us. There's nobody else." Washington says, "Victory or death." You see, Washington was unreasonable for the cause of liberty. He knew where we stood. So, Sullivan says, "Yes, sir." They move forward. They start to go. They get everybody marching. Snow is coming down really bad. They come to a point, General Greene, Nathaniel Greene, a great American you should know more about, which I'd love to tell you a story about someday. He comes up to General Washington and he says, "Sir, the powder is wet." You understand that the term flash in the pan, that comes from both the old photography, but also from the old muskets and rifles, because there was a flash pan that you had to pour powder into. Otherwise, you couldn't ignite the bullet the powder inside to fire the bullet, because there were no bullets. You had to put the powder in and ram it down and had the ball in. And then you had to put powder in the pan, and the flint had to strike metal. This is a complex process. Had to strike metal, and then a flash had to go off, igniting the pan, which then igniting the spark down into a vent tube, which set off the gunpowder inside the musket. Well, it's raining, it's snowing. The snow's coming sideways. All the weapons are wet. I mean, the soldiers have them upside down, but the powder's wet. They're going to attack without being able to shoot. Greene goes up and says, "Sir, I don't think we'll be able to fire our muskets and our rifles." Washington says, "Then we use the bayonet. Continue the march." They go forward. They come to a place called Jacob's Creek. And this creek is no big deal normally. But it's been raining and snowing, and it is now 6 foot down, 4 feet of water, and 6 foot across. It's now a little stream. It's almost a mini river. Knox comes up to Washington, Henry Knox, and says, "Sir, I don't think I can get my cannon across." Every leader there was at the point of wavering. Knox, Greene, Sullivan, these were good men. These were men who were unreasonable for the cause of liberty, but they had been up for 3 days. They were freezing. Everything was going wrong, and the timing was wrong, and they knew that if they fought the Hessians without being able to shoot, and the Hessians were ready to fight, it could be a slaughter. They knew that Washington only had to say the word, and they could turn around and go back. They still had the boats. Knox said, "I don't think I can get my cannon across this creek. There's no bridge." Washington said, "Henry, get your cannon across the creek." Do it. Henry Knox took the cannon apart, lowered him on ropes, took him across it, lowered him back up on ropes, reassembled him, and got him on the other side. It's almost daylight. We call it BMNT in the Army, before morning nautical twilight. It's right that time before dawn. I love this time. This is the best time to do an attack. It's a great moment. So here you are, early morning. Washington's moving forward. They come to a crossroads. Washington is going to send half of his force to the right and half of his force to the left so that he can come around the town in two ways. He's still going to continue the attack. And as he's moving forward, he sees a group of soldiers on horseback. And they're coming toward him. His men get ready to fight. And he looks at them, and they look like Americans. They look like New Jersey militia, but it's really hard to see in the snow. And finally, they get closer. And this captain of militia from New Jersey says, "Hey, sir, God bless. It's good to see you, General Washington. We didn't know you were going to be here. You should have seen us last night. You'd be so proud of us. We were out shooting and hollering. We were shooting at those damn Hessians. We shot and killed a couple of them." Washington is expecting surprise. Washington wants to surprise the Hessians. This militia captain has just roused them up. Washington says, "Sir, I think you have ruined us." Sullivan's looking at this, Greene's looking at this. They go to Washington, they give the look to Washington. Knox is looking, Hamilton's looking. What do we do? Victory or death. We go forward. Militia, you join us. You cause this mess, you join us. If we have to fight, we need every man. They move forward. They come to a Washington and Greene go one way, and they come to a place where they see the first Hessian outpost. They don't see any soldiers out on this house. There's this house out of Trenton a little bit. They don't see any soldiers outside the house, but they see a fire going from the fireplace, and they can barely see through the snow that there's a glint of a glow inside the house. Because when you're out in the country, you know the deal. You can see a light from far away. And this is just the graying of the day, and the snow is still coming down. Washington sees it and says he knows he's got to take that outpost out. They got to take it out silently. So he goes to Alexander Hamilton, who's standing by his side. He goes, "Alexander, take him out." Alexander says, "Hooah!" Takes another guy with him on a horse. They go out, 2 guys with sword, kill 7 Hessians, break down the door and kill them all. Hamilton comes back, blood all over his face. "We got him, sir. They didn't make a sound." "Good, let's go." They carry on. Washington moves up. He's able to get his forces to the crest of Trenton. Sullivan moves his force up. He's able to get them on the other side. Henry Knox brings up his cannon. The Continentals line up. They're checking their powder. They know they can't shoot. Only 1 out of 9 guys will be able to shoot. They form up their line. They get ready to go. They look. The snow begins to stop a little bit. It's still snowing, but it's just a little bit better because the sun is beginning to rise. No Hessians. Every morning, Rawls had his Hessians up. Why not today? Well, the militia captain had caused so much ruckus that Rawls got the entire regiment up at 4 in the morning, had him traipsing around in the middle of the snowstorm, got him so soaked that he said, "Ah, my children, it's been too tough on you. Go back to your beds and rest." There but for the grace of God. But if you quit, it's over. If you carry on, you can generate options. And that's what Washington did. He generated options. Options he couldn't even have foreseen, but options that occurred because he didn't quit. Henry Knox, start the ball. Boom! Knocks his cannon fire right through a house. Hessians wake up. They're running around with their pants on. We're whooping and hollering. Washington says, "Charge!" All the guys head forward. They hit the Hessians. They knock them down. They bayonet them. They shoot a few of them. The Hessians try to reform. Rawls gets his men together. They get together in the orchard. He got his cannons. He got his drums rolling. He's trying to bring cannon up. "Where's my horse? Where's my cannon?" Rawls gets hit twice. Falls down. Every regimental commander of the Hessians is killed. The Hessians surrender. It's over in less than 90 minutes. The Hessians lose about 90 soldiers, and we capture 995 of them with all their gear, their boots, their new coats, their weapons, their muskets with bayonets, their cannon, their horses, their colors. Our casualties? 0. Not a single Continental soldier killed. 2 soldiers died of hypothermia from the river crossing, but they were left at the river crossing. No one was killed. Washington is an amazing guy. There's more than one reason he's on the most used bill we have. This guy, but for the grace of God, there would be no America. Because the Congress had said they were gone, and they'd left everything in his hands. What's amazing is that 10 days later, he crosses the river again. He crosses the river back and forth, because that day they have to cross back, because he knows Cornwallis is coming after him. He then has to get everybody to re-enlist, because their enlistments are up. And he does that through force of leadership and a $10 bonus, which was huge then. And he had to get that $10 because the Congress wasn't paying anything. So he made a deal with a guy in Pennsylvania who helped him out in Philadelphia and get the money in time. Because that army of only 2,000 was all we had. In the Revolutionary War, 3% of Americans fought for the cause. Today, in our military, total of less than 0.5% of the population served. Less than 0.5%. Now, Washington was unreasonable for the cause of liberty. His story is a story you should tell your children and your grandchildren. He crossed again, fought the Battle of Princeton, and in 10 days it won 2 battles against the best forces in the world, and he saved our nation. He saved liberty. Otherwise, there would be no combination of national freedom, political freedom, and individual freedom in many places of the world, because we are the shining light that shows them how they can do that, if only they can grow their soil to accept that kind of very precious plant. So I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. And the last thing I would like to say is that after this, I will be signing books. I have written a book called 7 Leadership Lessons of the American Revolution. This story and many others are in it, which you should have to give your children and your grandchildren. It is also a great gift for those of you who are looking for that person who has everything. A signed book on this would be worth it. I think you'll like the cover. And on top of that, I remember what Mark Twain used to say, my favorite author. You do not honor an author by reading his book. You honor him by buying his book. Thank you. Sure, any questions, if we have time? Yes, sir.
Do you have it written down? Why do you wear the hat?
Oh, the hat, thank you. Many of us say that everything is too hard. I can't do anything. I don't matter. What can one person do? Well, a few years ago, I got together with some of my retired Army officers and some other people that I know who are entrepreneurs and business owners, and I said, let's do something. So we formed an organization within the North Texas chapter of the Association of the United States Army, the Audie Murphy chapter, to teach, coach, and lead college ROTC and soldiers in leadership. So with this organization, we do some amazing pro bono work. We all do this at no expense. I mean, we do this at no cost to us, at no pay. And we raise money every year, about $40,000 to pay for our program from donations. So what I do is I take these cadets to ROTC cadets, senior college ROTC cadets from North Texas, to Vicksburg, Mississippi, twice a year on a 3-day leadership experience, which is an amazing, high-definition leadership experience. If you can imagine the presentation I just gave, imagine also being involved with an interactive process where you actually had to lead and be in situations. That's what we do for them. And we do an amazing job there in Vicksburg, both in the spring and the fall. I also do a thing called Leadership in a Movie for these guys, where we come to their college, we watch a film, and we talk about leadership and raise their leadership quotient, which is very exciting. And the cadre that I have that does this is about 20 guys, and some of them come from as far as Florida and Tennessee to be a part of our exercises, because this is growing. And the other thing we do is once a year we take a group of about 10 to Normandy, France, and I'm writing a book now, 7 Leadership Lessons of D-Day, and we talk about how American leadership at D-Day was critical, and we go through the American sectors. So this is about not saying you can't do anything, about doing something. You see, none of us can do everything, and very few of us can do great things, but all of us can do something, and you do. All of you do something. This is my something. Thank you. I'll be over there if you would like to buy a book.